All right, we can start with the roll call.
Member Fasoon.
Here.
Member Hodges is absent. Member Larson.
Here.
Member Lieberman is absent. Member Melgen.
Here.
Member Vihale McClanahan is also absent. And Chair Mohammed.
Here. Now we can move on to the land acknowledgement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Wishan. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. And then we can move on to the approval of minutes.
Are there any questions or comments on the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Member Fasoon.
Yes.
Member Larson.
Yes.
Member Melgen.
Yes.
Chair Mohammed.
Yes. And then we can move on to public comment for any public members wanting to speak on an item not on the agenda.
If anyone would like to address the committee, please use the raise your hand function. Oh, we have one hand raised. Jeremiah, please go ahead.
Is this public comment for anything that's not on the agenda?
That's correct.
Oh, well, that's my jam then. Thank you. So just giving everybody my updated report. I'm over here at the Port of Oakland, and I always give updates and let you guys know what's going on about shipping exhaust and... Oh, man. Yeah, stand by, please, stand by. It's okay, let them go, let them go. So anyway, just to let everybody know here in this committee, good news on the waterfront. There's the first ship, container ship of its class, to run on compressed liquid natural gas. I know natural gas is not the cleanest thing in the world, but just to let everybody know, it's a really big improvement for these cargo ships and cruise ships. For the past years, these cargo ships have been running on raw mineral oil, bunker fuel. It's fossil fuel. It's the dirtiest sludge that comes from the earth, unrefined. And that's the fuel that all these ships have been using for years. So, out with the old, in with the new. Now we got ships running on liquid natural gas, and there's talks of propane, I guess a propane ship. So, but nothing beats the steam ships. They still have ships out here that are steam powered, and that's just water, so that's great. I think they should improve technology in steam powered ships. It's a lot of valves and a lot of pressure, but I'm sure we could figure it out. But just want to let everybody know there's a natural gas ship, and that's about it from out here for now. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you. If anyone else has their hands, would like to address the committee, please use the raise a hand function. I'm not seeing any other hands raised.
Thank you. We will now go on to the next item, which is announcements.
So I just have two short announcements on some of our previous agenda items. On the rebate program, which the Climate Action Committee recommended council provide more funding to. We haven't had a chance yet to put that on the council agenda, but we are planning to bring it for the first meeting in February, which is February 5th. And we're also, Sutton and I are working on the foodware ordinance that we spoke about a few months ago, and we're planning to start outreach probably next week to businesses. That's all.
Any questions? If not, I think we can move on to the next thing, which is public comment.
No, you've already done public comment. On the announcement, I'm sorry. If anyone would like to address the committee on the announcements, please use the raise your hand function. Not seeing any hands raised.
All right, thank you. Then I guess we'd move on to discussion for this announcements, but I'm not sure if anyone has any comments for the announcements. Yeah, so we can just move on to presentations.
Okay, well, let me just get set up. Go. Okay. Okay. Hello, committee members. I'll be giving a presentation talking about the multifamily EV charging pilot program that we launched a few years ago, and giving a summary of all the work that's been done and also an analysis of what we've learned from the program this evening. There we go. I'll start off with some background on the program itself. So this was a pilot program specifically designed to install electric vehicle chargers in multifamily buildings in the city. It included both technical assistance from staff as well as funding for the charger installations themselves. It was a budget of $50,000 with a maximum of $15,000 each for 3 buildings, and also $500 of discretionary funding for things like outreach. We also limited it to buildings with between 8 and 20 units, so the kind of mid-sized buildings that are fairly common throughout the city. There weren't a lot of requirements about the projects themselves or the charger types or anything like that, but we did require that building owners contribute to the cost of the project. So those are some basics about the program. This is a little timeline of the work that's been going on throughout the process. So this actually started out back in the summer of 2021 with program development. That was work that staff did in concert with the Zero Emission Transportation Subcommittee and with the Climate Action Committee. And it was approved by the council in October of 2021. And then we did some more detailed development and started the outreach and focus groups, both with building owners and tenants, in February and March of 2022. And then throughout the spring of 2022, we opened the applications and selected our program participants. We only had 3 applications, so it was an easy selection process, but we did get some great applicants and some variety, which was excellent. Then in the summer of 2022, we did project planning with those selected participants, talking through the different kinds of installation models they would be interested in, getting quotes from different contractors, comparing them, thinking about, charger brands, all those kinds of details. And in the fall, all of the building owners made decisions about the projects, and we did finalization on the contracts and also the specifics of the grant for each of those buildings. In winter and spring of 2023, this past year, we got the permits finalized and did the actual installations. Of course, we didn't do the installations. The contractors did, of course, but all of the chargers were installed. And then in summer and fall of 2023, we did tenant outreach, the tenants within the buildings, reflection interviews with program participants, analysis of different things learned throughout the program. And then, going into the end of last year, kind of finishing up reporting, following up, and providing more assistance to the building owners, tying up loose ends, those types of things. So lots and lots of work over the last few years and a lot of things learned. So I'll go over some of the highlights today. This is just a summary of the 3 buildings that were selected for the pilot program themselves. So the first one was 1234 Solano. This was a 12-unit building from around the 60s. This building had particularly low electrical capacity, which I'll talk about more. And we ended up installing 2 chargers that were positioned so that 4 parking spaces had access to those chargers. The next building was 1100 Portland. This is a bigger building. It had 12 units as well as 2 commercial units. It's newer, it's from the 2000s, and had very high electrical capacity, so we were able to install 11 chargers. And then 1126 Marin is an 8-unit building from the 70s. This one had kind of moderate electrical capacity and a sort of funny layout, and so we ended up installing 5 chargers that were spaced so that all 8 of the parking spaces had access to one of the chargers. And I'll go into more detail on each of these. So this is that first one, 1234 Solano. So like I said, the project installed 2 level 2 chargers. These are wall box chargers, which you can see in the picture here. And they were located each between 2 parking spaces, just like right down the middle line there, so that either car could reach the charger. You can see it has a fairly long cord. And this building used a load management system because there was such a small amount of electrical capacity. In order to get even 2 chargers, it was necessary to do this. And basically the way it works is there's 40 amps of power available to the charging system, and if only one of the chargers is being used at a time, it gets all of that power. But if both are being used, then they divide the power. So each one is half powered and it goes slower, but it does allow 2 people to use the chargers at a time. So it kind of expands the limited capacity that's available there. In terms of
You say 40 amps, you mean at 220 volts?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, 220 volts, which is the level 2 that's described there. Sorry, I should have covered that. And that's what all of the chargers installed through this program, where they were all level 2, 220 volt chargers. To get even more into the electrical, the way that this was done by the electrician was he put in a new sub-panel specifically for the chargers that branched off of the main panel. So this wasn't connected to any sort of tenant sub-panel specifically. It's just on the kind of main house panel. And currently there's no sort of automatic payment system. It would be manual. There's no tenants that are using the chargers right now. But if someone starts using them, then the building owners could manually charge the tenant by going into the online portal and seeing how much energy they had used in a given month. And I'll describe a little bit more about that process towards the end. 1100 Portland, like I said, installed 11 level 2 chargers. These are also 220 volt. They were also wall box chargers, so they ended up choosing the same brand. And like I said, this had a much higher electrical capacity, so they didn't need to use a load management system. It's a little simpler, and has the same payment setup where it would be manual, but no tenants are currently using the chargers. And then the final one is 1126 Marin. This is the most complex of the 3 projects. This, like I said, installed 5 level 2 chargers that were spaced out between the 8 spaces. So the parking garage in this building is a little weird. There's 3 spaces on one side and 5 on the other, which is why you end up with this sort of unusual layout. So 2 of the parking spaces have their own charger that only they can reach, and then the other ones all share a charger, basically. But that that ended up being the easiest way to do it, just based on the sort of geometry of the building. It also required load management in order to get all 5 chargers onto the electrical system. So again, it's 5 chargers that are sharing a limited amount of power. I forget exactly how many amps it was. It was more than the previous building, but if they're all going at once, they all get less power. It's also using a sub-panel off of the house panel. It's not connected to any tenant sub-panels. And then the other thing about this that was a little weird was that we used the CAL EVIP program. So we actually had a separate incentive program for this project. The reason for this was because the cost, even with using only the 5 chargers and all the work we did to try to bring it down, was still too high for the building owner. And so we were actually able to figure out that it was eligible for this CAL EVIP program, which is a state-run program. It's really meant for larger buildings, and so the eligibility requirements were written in a way that didn't make it clear whether this building would qualify. But we were able to speak with the staff running the program and determine that it was eligible, and that program covered 75% of the cost, which was really great. Unfortunately, the program ended not long after this building received the funding, so that can't be replicated, but it was useful for this. It also required an automatic payment service, so there is like a software program that can handle automated payment for these chargers for this building. I'll speak a little bit about the costs. So this first chart here breaks down the number of chargers, the total cost of each project, and then the city and owner contributions. So generally speaking, the city paid 80% of the cost of each project and the owner paid 20%. The one exception to that is the 1126 Marin building, where CAL EVIP covered 75%. And so what we did there was that the city covered 80% of the remaining cost and the owner covered 20% of the remaining cost. So that's the numbers you see here. And then we also have the average cost per charger down at the bottom. You'll notice that the 1234 Solano project had a fairly high cost per charger, given that it's only 2 chargers being installed. And 1100 Portland had a much lower cost with a lot more chargers. So there's efficiency when you get into a larger number of chargers. The highest cost, though, was the Marin building. This building had some more complexities to it, which is part of the reason that CAL EVIP was needed. The building itself was more difficult. We had to put the chargers on posts and run more wiring, and just sort of the geometry of the garage was a big part of that. And then on the right here, this chart shows the cost components as a percentage of each project. So the blue bar at the bottom is the installation costs. So, paying for the labor of the contractor and planning and all those sorts of things. And then the orange bar is the charging hardware itself. So the actual charger boxes and, posts and things like that. And then the green bar, which is just for the Marin project, is for the payment software. And now I'll talk a little bit about some of the insights that we've gotten from this project. I can't go into all of it, but I'll try to cover some of the highlights. So first of all, when it comes to owner priorities, one of the biggest things that we heard was that technical assistance was absolutely critical for owners, that they really just didn't know where to start when it came to EV charging, that they were concerned about, what all of the jargon meant and what their building could handle and who to trust. And so having technical assistance from someone who didn't have a financial stake in the project was really important for them. They were also concerned about cost, as we would expect. These projects can be pretty expensive. And we saw in the focus group when we asked how much people were willing to spend on EV charging for their building, It was pretty split between people saying they'd spend between $2,000 and $5,000 and people saying they'd spend under $2,000. Nobody said they would spend more than $5,000, which is how much it would cost if you don't have any incentives. So we saw that the amount they paid after incentives was about in line with this, but the real cost is much, much higher. And then the other thing people were concerned about is the payment model. You know, it was really important for the owners to know that they wouldn't be paying for the fuel for their tenants' cars, and that there would be an easy and doable model to make sure the tenants would be paying for that energy that they're using. In terms of the tenants, one of the biggest insights we had was that it was really difficult to connect with them. We did produce a EV guide that was sent to all the tenants of the buildings. The first page of it's on the right here. And also offered to do a live Q&A session, but we didn't get much interest in that. We also didn't have much luck with the focus group that we held. Got a lot of out-of-state and out-of-country folks attending, which was not what we were intending to do. But we are thinking about future efforts to connect with tenants and seeing if there's ways that we can maybe, you know, offer compensated interviews to tenants of the particular buildings in the project or something to that effect in the next couple months to see if we can learn more. One thing we do know is that there's very low adoption rates among tenants so far. There's only one tenant of all 3 buildings that does currently have an EV. And we know that there are a lot of barriers for tenants to get EVs, so we're hoping to work on that in coming months. In terms of buildings and installation, we learned a lot about the actual technicalities of installing EV chargers and different approaches. One of the big takeaways was that electrical capacity can be a major barrier. There's a lot of buildings with very little electrical capacity, but there are some really good solutions to that. Load management is a really, really good solution. I talked about it a little bit earlier, just the ability to share the load between multiple chargers. And it's even possible to share the load between chargers and other appliances. So for instance, you can charge your car, and then as soon as you turn the dryer on, it'll turn that charger off until the dryer's done. And you don't have to do anything, it just automatically works. And so there's quite a few solutions like that that are getting smarter and smarter every year and allow for some really clever use of the existing power. And then another solution is to use level 1 charging. That's 120 volts, the same as, you know, the standard outlet that you plug your phone into. It's much slower, but it does work, and it can work if tenants are not driving very long distances each day. And that's a much smaller ask of the electrical system. So that's another thing we can look into more. We also learned a lot about the charger placement, you know, that idea of placing chargers between 2 spaces creates access and splits the cost in half. So, you know, it does require sharing if you get to the point that every tenant has an EV, but it can still be really effective for making sure that everyone has access to charging. And we know that people aren't going to need to use a charger 100% of the time. There's also a lot we learned about the payment systems that are available. I'll just kind of go over these briefly. One system is using the tenant's electrical bill. So that's what's kind of shown in this picture here. You can actually connect each charger to a tenant's sub-panel, and that's the thing that measures how much electricity they use in their own unit each day. You know, it measures their lights on and everything. And so everything that they use for their charging, their EV charging, just goes straight onto their electrical bill, and the owner doesn't have to be involved at all. And so that method can be really useful in certain kinds of buildings. It can be more expensive to install that way, but not always. So that's really promising. And then there's also manual billing. This is what 2 of the buildings have right now, where, you know, most of the chargers that are on the market involve, they have the technology to track who's using the charger, when they're using it, how long, how much power they're using, even how much the power costs based on time of use rates at the time they're using it. And so as a building owner, you can just go onto a dashboard, see all that information, and you can, send your tenant a bill every month or every 3 months based on that information there. So you can do it manually. It does require a bit more work, but it's very possible. And then finally, there's automatic payment systems, which is basically software that does that work for you. It connects to your tenant's bank account and does all the transactions, and you don't have to do a single thing. They're pretty powerful, and they can be pretty advanced in the ways that you can schedule things and incentivize charging at various times and whatnot. But the downside is that they cost quite a bit of money. They usually cost about $200 per charger per year, which really can eat into the potential fuel savings for a tenant. So some things to balance there, but there definitely are solutions that work for various types of buildings. And so with that, I'll just say, this pilot program I think was really successful. I definitely learned a lot from being enmeshed in it for several years. And I think there's a lot of potential routes to go for future programming if the city wants to try to expand this type of work into other multifamily buildings. It doesn't have to look exactly like this program. We could try to make it more efficient in various ways, cost efficient, time efficient. We could try to make it more targeted or more broad. There's a lot of different approaches. But if the city and if the committee is interested in pursuing that, I think there's a lot of potential routes to go down and a lot of detail I can dig into. So with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Thanks, that's fantastic. Great to see the feedback there. Did you say that you tried to reach out to the tenants, but you didn't really get any response to them? Is that why there wasn't really any tenant response so far?
Yeah, we sent out, like I said, that tenant EV guide. And then also, spoke to the building owners and offered up Q&A sessions and tried to send out information about that possibility, and just didn't really get much response from any of the tenants.
Yeah, because you mentioned, that there's only one tenant that has an EV, and tenants we know have lots of barriers to obtaining a EV and using it. So we don't really have any feedback yet of this, if this is one of the big challenges that allows them to overcome that or not, right?
Yeah, that's one of the things we really would like to learn, and
Yeah.
like I said, we're hoping to do try some different outreach tactics, because it would be really helpful to know how much of an impact this makes for tenants.
Yeah. Were the owners at the end of it, did you get a chance to talk to them, interview them?
Yeah, there's one more I have to do, but 2 of them I did have a chance to do a reflection interview with.
And did they say, I'm glad I did this, or man, that was a horrible idea, or what was their feedback?
Yeah, they were all very happy about it. They were really excited from the start, and all were motivated in large part because they just feel like this is the future and that it needs to happen. And even if there's no tenants using it right now, it's inevitable. So I think they're all happy to be set up. They've been telling me, they're advertising it now when they're looking for new tenants, and hoping to get some users in. So yeah, they've all been very happy with the program.
Just to say, this is a really nice presentation. Thank you, really clear.
Thank you.
I know next to nothing about EVs, so this was helpful.
One thing you didn't touch on was sort of security, or, and I know there's only one EV in all these parking spaces, so maybe it didn't really come up yet, but yeah, especially if you're doing the tenant's electrical bill where it's tied into their sub panel, having the security that you're the only one that can use that EV charger. Did that come up, or was there some investigation of how that would be managed?
Yeah, that's a great question. We did look into that, and it depends on the payment model, obviously. For the types that are in these buildings where they're shared chargers, and the payment is either automated or done manually through that dashboard I mentioned, the chargers have the ability to limit who can use a given charger. Basically, you download an app on your phone and you have to like log into the charger.
Oh, okay.
And so in order for it to start working, it has to know who you are and have a tracking capability.
Yeah.
So outside users wouldn't be able to use it, and you could even limit it to particular tenants. If you were going to use that model where you're connecting a charger to a specific tenant's subpanel, you could use a smart charger like this that has that ability as well, or you could do a kind of physical locking mechanism, theoretically. You know, potentially you could use even like an outlet, and you could just put like a lockbox and a lock over it. Yeah. So there's that method as well.
You mentioned the Cal EVIP program that like it shut down, but are there any other programs like that still open? Or?
So the Cal EVIP program technically does still exist, but they've shifted towards commercial fast charging, which is like very high powered, doesn't make sense for these kinds of buildings. And then there's also a Bay Area Air District program called Charge with an exclamation mark at the end. They kind of launch new funding rounds, I think each year. So I am expecting there to be more funding coming from that. It is a little difficult because usually they sort of launch it and it's gone in like a month or a few weeks or something, and it all happens very quickly. But I am expecting there to be a new round. They kind of change it every year, so I don't have all the details on it.
Any other questions?
I just have a couple more questions. You showed the cost per charger and the total cost of the project, and then you showed that pie chart that said that people would pay up to $5,000. You know, there was sort of the $2,000 and the $5,000. It seems like the cost per charger was around $5,000, right?
Yeah, for two of those buildings.
The average cost per charger, last line there, was sort of, if you do the average in there, that's somewhere in the 4,000 range, right? So that's per charger. Do you remember if the question you asked about the pie chart one, was that total project cost or was that per charger? The pie chart one you had? Yeah, that one.
This was for total project cost.
Okay.
Yeah, so pretty far off, yeah. Also, I'll just quickly note, I had two of these numbers mixed up in the memo, the Portland and Marin cost per charger, but I fixed them in this graph, thanks to a member of the public for pointing that out to me. But yeah, so pretty far off from the actual costs.
Big gap, yeah, okay. And then last question I had is, were all the parking areas, there was already a parking lot or something like that? None of these were street parking, right?
Yeah, they were all parking garages, and they were all in like the first floor of the building.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
And I guess we can move on to public comment.
Yes, we have two people with their hands raised. Lucinda Young, please go ahead.
Thank you. I want to really commend Michelle for such a great presentation and for all the work that she's done the last few years. I was aware that this project was going on and have been eager to get more details, and just great to hear details tonight. A little disappointing that we've only had one tenant so far, but as Michelle mentioned, I'm hopeful that this will motivate some tenants to move in that direction. I have talked to a few tenants over the years who have always expressed that as the barrier to even considering EVs is that they have no place to charge. So I'm hoping that's going to change. A couple of things I'm wondering if there's a nonprofit I get emails from. It's called Ride and Drive Clean that offers EV shows and offers opportunities to for people who are interested in EVs to talk to EV owners. And they also offer discounts periodically, various discounts on EVs. And I'm just thinking it would be good to make the tenants aware of that. And also, some people who are hesitant to make the jump to a full EV, the plug-in hybrids are really a great kind of in-between, which allows owners to basically all of their around town travel is by EV, but then when they're making the long distance, they're able to use gas. But that's a great. And also, I've been an EV owner for 5 years. Have had a great experience, and I know that we have Nick Peterson, who often comes to these meetings, is also an EV owner. I think we would love to talk to people who are considering purchasing an EV about our experience. So I don't know if it might be a possibility to get a group of Albany residents who are or have been EV owners to share our experience. But terrific job, Michelle. Thanks so much for all your work.
Thank you. Next speaker is Nick Peterson. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Lucinda, for the intro. So yeah, I really want to praise the staff for, this was a really big success. And as it was funded by Measure DD funds, I think it's important to have these kind of examples. The data and information we've got out of this has been really valuable. And I think it's established kind of a blockhead for moving forward, or a bulwark for moving forward. And if other building owners complain or whatever, say, well, these building owners did it with some help. So I was always a little worried that the city would pay too much to do these. But I think in the long run, we have early adapters, and so they get the benefit of being the first doing that. One thing I'm wondering is, it'd be nice to go into a phase 2 fairly quickly on this, and I know you're spending time focused on this gas pruning effort that the city received the $200,000 DOE grant. And I'm wondering if there's some way to make this, the next phase, be dovetailed with that, where we specifically look for buildings that are naturally occurring affordable housing, that they meet some kind of qualification of how the cost of the units are, and that we do a lot more outreach to the tenants, showing, where they can get rebates and credits for EV purchases. I've seen where in Portland, they did a really good outreach and were able to get people that use their cars for Uber work, and we're actually able to, with the rebates and everything, afford the car and then be able to do that for less than it costs in a gas power car. So I think there's some opportunity here to blend our efforts and overlap them and move forward with another study. The other thing I would think is, this could be advertised out to the multiple family unit owners, and there should be a program that provides certain incentives, but that they diminish over time. And at some point, that program would actually maybe require a certain level of available EV charging if you were renting out and provided parking to renters. So I think bringing these things in early, getting the industry used to it, is an important thing to do. But thank you very much. Very, very good report.
Thank you. And next, David Wimmer, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. That was a great, great presentation. A lot of good work there. Really feels good to hear we're spending some of that money we've got in the bank for moving us forward. And I also support some of or all of Nick's comments about suggestions for moving forward with some more good work. Thank you again.
I don't see any other hands raised at this time.
Thank you. We can move on to discussion of this presentation. Any comments?
Well, dovetailing on the public comments and question, what are the plans already set or thought of by the city staff on a second phase of this, and what can the Climate Action Committee do to support or promote that?
It's a good question. I think it's pretty open at this point. I mean, I think the first question is the committee interested in pursuing a second phase and looking into options for that? And then assuming the answer to that is yes, I think the discussion to have is sort of, do we want to do a very broad type of program where we try to, get chargers installed in lots of buildings, or do we want to do another sort of smaller thing where we're trying to be really focused on a few buildings? Do we want to do something that's, trying to dovetail with another program and sort of, try to build in some city funding to something else that already exists, like maybe trying to work with that charge program in some way that I talked about, or is it just sort of entirely a city endeavor? You could think about if you want it to be really technical assistance focused, or incentive funding focused, or both. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions to answer, a lot of different routes to go, but I think the committee would have to decide if it's interested in pursuing that, and then, that could be subcommittee work to kind of work more closely with staff, and if the committee had some direction about sort of generally what it thinks would be a good approach. But yeah, I wouldn't, staff it's not like we have some sort of plan ready to go.
That's what I was curious, yeah. And I guess I missed, did the money that was allocated for this program get completely all used, or what's the?
No, it didn't. I forget exactly what the number is, but we are under budget for the program because only one of the buildings reached its maximum amount of $15,000.
But we would probably need to do a similar proposal to City Council to get more funding allocated for a follow-up program, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so both the scope, sort of the purpose, if it's going to be the same or different, and the funding could be something the Climate Action Committee pushes back through the same cycle, right?
Yeah. So a new program proposal with all of those components would have to go to council.
Okay. I'm trying to remember the inventory of apartments in the city. Are there? I think that there was quite a few of this size, right? There was.
Yeah, so the 8 to 20 unit buildings that we did for this project, there are about 50 of those throughout the city.
Yeah, okay.
Which is a fairly large number in the scheme of things.
Yeah, right. I was just thinking about the opportunity for, that seemed like I don't know, what was your opinion of that size? Was that the right choice?
Yeah, I think it was useful, at least for this type of program. It made it sort of manageable. And it created a pretty, a fairly large but still manageable pool of eligible applicants.
Right.
But, depending on what a new program looked like, it definitely could be expanded to other building sizes.
I could definitely take it to the zero emission what are we, transportation? Keep on screwing that up. In our next subcommittee meeting. So, and then maybe next meeting, come back with some like ideas or, not a proposal probably, but just ideas. Discuss it some more.
Are other committee members interested in that, or any other opinions on it?
I guess that's a good question. I mean, since we have the opportunity to talk, I mean, hearing what the report, is that something that you would, as the committee, support a follow-on project? Just, I'm not trying to commit you in right now, but just, is that a sort of a thumbs up or a thumbs down?
Seems like a good way to spend some of that Measure DD money. Yeah.
Any other comments? If not, we can move on to the next item, which is discussion and possible action.
Yes, and 6.1 is the election of the chair and vice chair. I would recommend to the committee to postpone that item until next month, since we are missing 3 of our members tonight.
I'll make a motion to do exactly that.
Second.
Member Fasoon? Member Larson?
Yes.
Member Melgen?
Yes.
Chair Mohammed?
Yes.
Okay, we can go to 6.2 if you'd like, Chair Mohammed.
Okay, yeah, we can move on to the next item, which is Zero Emission Transportation Subcommittee proposal.
All right.
Go ahead.
So I think, as you know, in the Zero Energy Emission Transportation Subcommittee, my interest and sort of the avenue that I was pursuing was the city fleet electrification and city-related kind of ideas about EVs and charging stations. So I put this presentation together in order to get feedback from you. So it has draft proposals in here. They're not necessarily, I'm not expecting to get them ratified tonight, but I'm looking for feedback so then I can take back to the ZET subcommittee and we can, refine them and then come in February with the actual proposals. So that's sort of what I'm expecting. So it has a little bit of information here. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So just a reminder, the Albany KALB, the Climate Action Plan, one of the items has always been in there, that the city will implement municipal fleet procurement policy and encourage switch to electric motorized equipment. So it's a long-standing goal in our climate action plan. I think that the benefits of this would be that the city can make a statement to the residents that we are really committed to climate action by electrifying the city fleet. EVs are a very visible way. Once city vehicles start becoming electric vehicles, they're going to be seen around town. People are going to feel comfortable, oh yeah, the city's into it. And this is, the last bullet point's maybe a little bit funny because one of the things that in the presentation you'll see the consultants for Albany, did the pros and cons. And one of the cons was actually that there's not very many vehicle miles traveled in Albany. I mean, it's a 1 mile square city. And so there's not really that much benefit to EVs because it's not going to really make a difference in the big picture of carbon reduction. But it also makes EVs very feasible for a city like ours. I mean, we don't have to worry about going out into the Iowa, pastures to, check the fence rows. It's, it's a small little city, so you can really just, you can use an EV for almost everything here. So I think that that's actually a benefit. And would also reduce the charging requirements, probably, definitely not needing to charge every night. So anyway, those are just some things off the top. Some information, I just, did a little bit of searching around, and the California, the U.S. Department of Energy has a big thing on city fleet and state fleet electrification. It's a program that's been going on since 2012 was the first, well, probably not the first, but anyway, I saw things back to 2012. In fact, California had a plan, has had a plan in place since 2012 to electrify the state fleet. So it's something that's been going on for a while. There's lots of information about how you do it. It's not a new concept by any means. Lots of cities have done it. So it's certainly out there and being implemented very practically. So that's just examples here. So next slide. Albany hired a consultant back in 2022 to do an assessment of electrifying the city fleet. And I don't have the report. I did a little screenshots just to provide some information, but if they're posted on the Climate Action Committee website, so you can go back and look at them. But anyway, there was things like there was 20 light-duty vehicles identified. There's an inventory of about 50 vehicles total in Albany, including emergency and all the different types of vehicles. There was estimates of, a big estimate of each individual vehicle and how long it's been around and when it would be turned over and all that. And then also that emergency and medium and heavy duty vehicles were not analyzed because at the time it really wasn't feasible to try to replace those. And so that was just a year ago, so it's still pretty new information. And the point of this is just that, Albany has already looked at city fleet electrification. They had a consultant come in and take a look at this. So next slide. There was also recommendations of charging station locations within the city. There was 3 different sites that were identified as charging station areas for city fleet vehicles. There was analysis of the incremental cost of electrifying the whole fleet over 10 years. And there was, if you watch the video, there was a long discussion about, and I was in on it, about what that meant, because the consultants included not only the incremental EV cost, but cost of the charging stations and the cost of photovoltaic installations, and then over the 10 years. So there was the $500,000 incremental was a big cost, but that's not like the incremental cost per car. So, and it looked at 20 vehicles over 10 years, did not include police, fire, ambulance, heavy duty. Next. And then staff gave an update in June of 23, and there's actually a electric vehicle in the city fleet now, the GEM car. So that's awesome. And there was a mention of a EBCE fleet study completed, but there wasn't much information about what that meant or where that was going. So I want to bring that up as far as, if we can get an update at some point on that. Again, there's charging readiness already at the PW facility. I couldn't figure out what that meant exactly, the PW facility. Public Works? Oh, okay, I just got it, okay. So that's good. There's already charging readiness at one of the sites. And so it mentioned the challenges, the parking spaces at city locations, and how you monitor that and make it available for city versus visitors. There was cost benefit with the low mileage on the fleet vehicles. And again, I try to counter that on the very first slide, so anyway. But anyway, so there was an update on that, but there was, in this update, there was no proposal for any kind of action for fleet electrification at the time. Next slide. Right, so I mentioned the EBC study to be released. Lizzie said it's on our radar for when cars are swapped out. So anyway, wanted to just highlight that because I wasn't sure what that meant or where, if anything had happened with that. And yeah, I pretty much covered all the rest of that. Oh, important point, the last bullet's an important point, I should have highlighted that. It was mentioned that, or maybe Michelle, maybe you just told me that the fleet procurement, meaning the individual vehicles, is handled by each department individually. So there isn't like one person in the city that decides overall that this is going to happen. So each department gets to decide what vehicles they replace their fleet with. So that'll go into one of my proposals here coming up. So, all right. So I wrote up proposals for 3 different things. One is the first proposal, and just the summary so you get an idea of where I'm heading here. Number 1 is that Albany will electrify the fleet over some period of time and in some, number of cars to be determined. Number 2, Albany City will install charging stations to power the fleet. And number 3, that we'll look into or install public charging stations at city-owned property. And so those are the 3 proposals. So I wrote up some draft language. Again, I didn't spend too much time trying to make it perfect here because I was really looking for feedback if this is a direction and any kind of feedback here. So if you go to the next slide. So number 1 is the fleet vehicle. So number 1, to make a statement that Albany will electrify their city vehicle fleet as vehicle turnover provides the opportunity. And I kind of thought of that language, meaning that's sort of how I'm looking at this. That's what I would like this proposal to do. And I'm interested in feedback if that's, too strong or too, weak, or if we want to make that more specific, whatever. But because there's so many vehicles that have such low miles traveled, it's, clear that there's going to be various levels of turnover of the vehicles. And we're not, I don't think, looking to say the whole fleet needs to turn over in like next year. I think, we're looking for this to be the start of a transition and over some period of time. So Albany City Council, we would make a proposal that Albany City Council says to the city departments that all departments are required, all departments that own vehicles are required to prioritize electric vehicles for replacement as vehicles turn over. So that would be a way to try to get a blanket statement out to the city that, because each department gets to choose what they do, but the city council would say that you are prioritizing EVs as vehicles turn over. And then putting in a goal for the turnover, all applicable city vehicles within 10 years. And again, the consultant came up with 20. We'll see if that's the right number, but anyway, that's sort of, I thought putting a goal for turnover would be good. And then the last one is that Albany City goal is to continue to transition all city vehicles, police pursuit, emergency vehicles, heavy duty, as those types of vehicles become available and practical. So that's number 1. Number 2 is a statement about that as the Albany City vehicle fleet turns to electric, we're going to need charging stations. Albany City Council will authorize the expenditure to install appropriate charging stations. So again, asking for the commitment to the allocation of monies to do that, and to have staff start a program to do that, or whoever they the city manager appoints it to. And then that Albany City fleet vehicle charging stations will give priority to city vehicles, but may be designed that public charging is an option. Just wanted to slip that in there so it's not like it's behind a locked gate all the time. But if that's the way it needs to be, then that's the way it needs to be. And number 3 is, and this is a debate about whether to put this in here, but I thought go ahead and put it in because we've had a lot of discussion about public charging stations and how useful they are, and the complexity of getting them done. I was just, my wife and I went down to Big Sur. Maybe this is too much information, but we stopped at Half Moon Bay for lunch, and the restaurant we were in, there was a charging station in a public, street parking, diagonal street parking, right outside the window of the restaurant we were in. And I just looked over, and there was a car charging at a charging station. And, so Half Moon Bay is totally embracing this, going with public charging on the street at diagonal parking spaces and everything, right in front of a restaurant. So I thought I'd go ahead and put this in. That Albany wants to encourage city residents to transition to zero-emission transportation vehicles. We want visible and distributed availability of charging stations to help encourage that transition. And that Albany City Council will fund a project to investigate sites, charging stations, lots, and then I put a couple examples, like, just driving around town, the community center and the city hall are a couple of city-owned properties that have parking spots that could be part of this. So the goal would be to install appropriate number of charging stations and engage with external partners to provide EV charging at city property. So those are the three proposals. I think that's the last slide. Last slide? Yeah, okay. So those are the three proposals that I wanted to bring forward, get your comments, and then I'll refine with the subcommittee and come back next month with a tighter proposal. So, yeah.
Any questions?
I have two clarifying questions. So I know we can't comment right now because it's just questions, but I really like how you covered a large scope of things within the three proposals. I think it was proposal 2, could you clarify, you talked a little bit about it, where it says it may be designed for public use as well as the city? Do you mean if it is originally for specific city vehicles, it may be designed that it's technically open to the public, or can you clarify what that means?
Right. I guess what I was thinking was that that we would make sure that this program is started with the idea that it's to satisfy the city vehicle fleet. So, for example, if there's cars that are parked here in City Hall, I don't know, maybe the building inspector parks at City Hall, I guess, maybe let's say, that there would be a charging station that would be prioritized to that. But it's there so that if it's available, and I don't know exactly how this would work, but if it's available, that a public person could use it. It wouldn't be locked down to city only permanently forever. But if that becomes unmanageable, then I think that's a secondary thing.
Okay, thanks. And for I'm just because I don't know too much about how funding this stuff works. So when you prioritize city departments with EV, that money comes from the city to do that, right? Okay.
I think so.
Okay.
When we get to, maybe Michelle.
I know funding's always a big
Right, and maybe I'll just say that I intentionally didn't try to say where the funds are coming from. I thought about saying, DD funding will make the incremental difference between, a gas-powered and electric vehicle. But I thought, well, maybe I'd wait and see if somebody thinks that's a big deal, because it's city money. And as far as I know, it would be city money. And if city council says, yes, we're prioritizing this, then it's city money. They're getting behind paying for it.
Okay.
Yeah, I can say, the city budget covers new vehicle purchases, right now, and unless there was some sort of external source of funding we could find, which I don't know any, then yeah, it would be city budget, just the general fund covering the purchase of electric vehicles or charger installations or any of that.
Okay.
I'm a rookie here, but has the city contemplated buying land specifically to create space for EV chargers? I assume that's legal, there's no problem with that. So what I'm thinking of is, could the city buy a strip of land a few feet wide on the east side of Masonic where the BART tracks run, buy it from BART, and then put a long string of EV chargers there? Just a possibly crazy thought. I have no idea if this makes any sense at all, but part of the problem here is just land.
And I'll just clarify that my proposals are very much geared towards the city fleet and the city property. Troy and Dan are working on similar proposals for public charging and street parking and stuff like that. And absolutely, I think that's a great suggestion. I think it would be applicable to what they're working on as far as, you know, public street parking. Yep.
Any other questions?
Let me try one more, since my first one I thought people would laugh, but they didn't. One of the issues here is the low vehicle miles traveled. So I was thinking, who has vehicles in Albany that travel a lot per year? And one that leaps to mind is the post office. Has there ever been anywhere in this wonderful country of ours a city that paid the local post office to electrify its vehicles or anything like that? Or is that just too far out to lunch?
I do know that the post office, you know, it's a federal program, and I have heard that there's a goal to electrify post office vehicles over, you know, 10 or 20 years, but that's not within city jurisdiction, and I'm pretty sure that's all kind of run at a very high federal level.
So maybe the city could volunteer to be the first guinea pig?
Theoretically, I don't know anything
Yeah.
about how the post office works, though.
I think we can move on to public comment.
Okay, thank you. We have two people who have their hands raised. Three, four. First, Jeremiah, please go ahead.
Yeah, Jeremiah here. Yeah, just segueing off that post office comment, suggestion. I have a lot of creative ideas, and actually, this one makes sense too. Think about it. Those post office trucks are driving Albany streets every day. Those little Jeeps or whatever they are, every single day, up and down the blocks, every day, all day. And yeah, that'd be great if those were electric, because probably really only need a little 4-cylinder or a little 3-cylinder or something like that. Okay, so what I want to say is, I'm pretty sure a couple years ago, we already had created funding. There were already 7 EV city chargers purchased. They were supposed to be installed already, right? We used to have, 1 or 2 at Public Works. There was supposed to be 1 installed in the City Hall parking lot. What happened to all this stuff? Where's the checks and balances to all this stuff that was supposed to happen that never did? We already bought 7 city chargers. Where'd they go? Right? So I just want to clarify, what happened to those 7? Because we already bought them. But it would be great. We already suggested that. I remember the police department having, electric charging stations and electric vehicles, but the police were worried about the electric vehicles weren't good enough to run their equipment all day. They have a lot of equipment in their vehicle, picks up a lot of power. So they said electric vehicles won't work for the police because their cars require, their CB radios and all this sort of, stuff. But anyway, I'm speaking now because I just want to know what happened to those original 7 that we already bought a couple years ago that were supposed to be installed, and they're already supposed to be at the City Hall. So where is it? Just curious. Thank you. Looking for an update.
Okay, thank you. Next, Nick Peterson, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Nick Peterson, Albany Climate Action Coalition. Yeah, this is something that I think is good, and thank you, Committee Member Larson, for such a thoughtful presentation, and the other members that are on that subcommittee. It's good to see it reach this level. I commend all this, and as a person in Albany, I know, comments have been made about how well the emissions from the city vehicles aren't really very much compared with all of Albany. But what's important is the city is the leader. I mean, if there's one organization within the city that is setting precedent and bringing us all together and championing, this addressing climate change with the climate action adaptation plan, it's the city, and we all look to the city. I think the residents of the city look to the city as our democratically elected and empowered entity to sort of guide our way. So seeing the city do something that's highly visible is really important, even though the emission reduction would be pretty minuscule. But that's not the point. The point is to be a leader and to show how it's done and to exemplify that our community supports this kind of work. So I encourage the committee members to really embrace what Member Larson's proposing and put all three of these through. The one thing that's a favorite of mine, though, is I think that the vehicles we tend to really notice the most are the police vehicles. And I've done a fair amount of research, and there are quite a few cities around the country, some on the East Coast. I think New York City is using a bunch of electric Mustangs for their cruise vehicles. And there's all sorts of other information that just hammers this down. No. And I think there's a bit of an attitude on the blue uniform side that everything needs to be per this, police standard look. So we get in Albany these big gas guzzling, so-called energy efficient because of hybrid, but they're still only, under 30 mile per gallon cars that are very big, overwhelm everything and look almost like military vehicles, which really isn't the look that I think as an Albany person I want our police to look like. So there could be sort of nicer, a little bit trimmer vehicles that other small police forces have used and are currently using that are all electric. I mean, Tesla Ys are really a good pick for that. They're not that small car. They're like a SUV. So this has all been done. A lot of the bells and whistles about how they work with police equipment have been worked out. And, it's doable. It's been done. So I think there should be at least one, in this proposal, there should be at least one pilot project for a police cruiser to be all electric. I think it's really essential. I think the police would get on board once they see how beneficial it is, how well it works for low mileage, for high acceleration, for all sorts of other things. I mean, there's a lot of advantages that come with electric vehicle. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, Lucinda Young, please go ahead.
Thank you, Committee Member Larson. That was a great presentation. I typically try to review these before the meeting, and I didn't have a chance to do that, so I'm hearing this for the first time, and there's a lot of information here that I would want to kind of look over, but hearing it at first glance, this is just some terrific ideas. I want to echo what Nick Peterson just spoke about, that is the importance in the city modeling and leading on electric vehicle adoption. That is really critical and takes priority over the fact that there's, we have basically low vehicle miles given that we are a very small city. The other thing, since we are small, there would be no need for level 3 chargers, the fast chargers, level 2 chargers, which are much, much less expensive than the level 3s would be adequate for the city. I also want to express the same concern that the first speaker spoke about there were, and I don't believe it was 7, my recollection is that there were 5 EV chargers that our city council authorized installation of, which I think happened in 2021. I know that committee member Troy was looking into that, and we did not get an explanation as to what really happened with that. I know Elizabeth had addressed it last year, or maybe it was even the year before, in response to questions, but we really didn't get an explanation other than that for some reason the funding had disappeared. I think that's it. Thank you. Thanks. Great presentation.
Okay, thank you. Next, David Wimmer, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Member Larson, for an excellent presentation. Just a couple of quick things. On the proposal 1, you used the term about, the departments would prioritize. I'd like to have that be a stronger word, like require. Prioritize just doesn't seem as definite as, require. Like, that should be a mandate that departments will move forward with EVs. And then your final bullet on that slide had to do with the police and cruisers and pursuit vehicles. I didn't know why that needed to have its own bullet. I mean, wouldn't that be just part of the upper bullet that was prioritizing? They're a department like everybody else. So I didn't know why you were giving that its own bullet when it should just be part of, I think, the whole city program for departments to, require them to move forward. And I also agree with the previous speakers about the city taking a lead role to set an example, and so our citizens can see that the city is moving forward with making meaningful changes. Set that example, and so yeah, I would rather move forward with a near-term replacement than so-called when they get older and they start accruing the miles and then it's time to roll over. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands raised.
Thank you. We can move on to discussion of this item.
Let me speak in defense of our wonderful police department. I heard some of these comments before about the police cruisers, so and separately I learned later, Michelle independently had interviewed the lieutenant, I think he is, of the Albany Police Force, who was in charge of making the initial recommendation. The fellow was an EV enthusiast, and he owns a couple of EVs right now. He really tried hard to find an EV that would meet Albany's needs. I don't recall anymore, I wrote it down, but I can't find my notes right now, what he had to say about the Mustang model, about the relevant Tesla model. He commented that number 1, it has a glass roof, and number 2, it has, well, it does not have what he called a full frame door, rear door. And so his bottom line was that a suspect in handcuffs could cause massive amounts of damage if the suspect got riled up. And so that was one of several reasons about not going with the Tesla model, but that he personally is eager to look for new models for the next go-round. So I just thought it'd be a great debate. It'd be fun to watch a debate face-to-face between that gentleman and some of the commenters here. But I think the next time there will be more EV models available, and maybe the police department will reach a different decision. But their heart is in it. If there had been an EV, we'd have one now. Thank you.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, you know, the visibility of the police is, I think, one of the things that brings out that. But I think, you know, just, you know, a sober step back is we got to get started. And the city vehicle, there's lots of city vehicles. There's lots of opportunity here. So that's kind of why my proposal is, you know, prioritize. And I got the point from the public comment that maybe a little bit stronger word than prioritize. So I'll put some thought into that and see what we come up with. But, yeah, I mean, we have to get started. So this would be the push to get city council to say, we're starting. So that's.
Let me just add, another thing that came up is apparently there's a consultant's plan to provide EV charging at some of the stations out here that are close to the police department parking stalls. So somebody has already done the math there to figure out the electrical capacity and so on. That proposal, I believe, is on the shelf somewhere. Is that right, Michelle?
Kind of. So Member Larson mentioned that there was a e-fleet study that was done. EBCE funded that study, so that's the EBCE fleet study mentioned. And that went into details about the fleet vehicles and the turnover and charging stations. It didn't go so far as looking at like electrical capacity and specifically where to connect chargers, any of those kinds of details, which parking spots. So it didn't get into the kind of mechanics.
Okay.
But it did go into like number of chargers, like level 2 versus fast chargers, and how many they thought we would need for the non-emergency vehicles and at which location. So those types of details.
All right, good. Well, that's good feedback. I'll refine and work with Troy and Dan a bit and come back in February with a little bit tighter proposal. I guess one, since we got the opportunity, the proposal 3, which is the city property for public charging specifically. Is that worth pursuing? And if it's too big a debate here, then that's, you know, that's too much. That's fine. But, you know, that's where it kind of got a little, you know, in previous discussions, it got a little complicated because then you start talking about, you know, people using it, how often do they use it, and all that kind of stuff. Is it?
Well, just kind of off the cuff, if we're going to have, you know, hundreds of EVs around 5 or 10 years from now, and that certainly seems to be the plan, public charging on city property seems to me to be a really high priority. I mean, it's if we want these people to drive EVs, and it seems like it's kind of expensive to put them in apartment buildings where each one is available to maybe just 2 or 3 tenants. And I don't know that individual homeowners are going to want to fork over $5,000 to charge an EV. So it seems to me that this is a really high priority.
Okay. All right, great, thanks.
I guess we can move on to the next item.
Okay, yes, this item is some beginning of the year advisory body reminders, and also just a time to kind of talk about the upcoming work for the year that we have planned, and also the subcommittees that are currently active for this committee. I won't go into too much detail about the advisory body reminders. I had some of the kind of basic reminders that we say every year in the memo. So I'll just kind of note a few things that, first of all, you know, the Climate Action Committee is an advisory body. Its role is to advise the council, and specifically for this committee, to advise the council on items related to climate action and reducing greenhouse gases and adapting to climate change. That's the purpose of the committee as laid out by council. And of course, the committee does not have the power to enact policies or programs by itself, but only recommends these things to council, which I think you guys are all familiar with. And also just a reminder about the Brown Act, which requires that all relevant communications between more than a quorum of members be held at a public meeting like we're having tonight. And so really what that means is to be careful to not discuss any committee items outside of a subcommittee that you're in that has 3 or fewer members. There's lots of, you know, little confusing scenarios you might get into. Things like email and social media can be tricky, but just trying to remember to not be discussing with somebody outside of your subcommittee. And if you have any questions about specific scenarios, you can always ask me. So that's our normal reminder for every year. So you can always ask me in general, and also after I kind of give my little spiel here tonight, if there's any Brown Act questions or advisory body questions you have. But what I'm gonna spend most of my time talking about is the work items that we have planned for 2024. This came up a few months ago when we were working on the status update to council, which had a really broad overview of the upcoming work for the committee. And some members asked if we could kind of get into that in a little bit more detail. So I've broken it down here, and this is not by any means like a complete list of everything that we'll work on. There might be things that we don't work on much this year. There'll be things that come up that aren't necessarily planned. But this is really just to kind of break it down into a little bit more detail, and so that we can all have a chance to review it before we kind of get into the weeds on these items throughout the year. And it's broken up into 3 buckets, which were the kind of top headlines on that status update that we sent to council. The first is electric vehicles and active and public transit. That includes the multifamily EV charging pilot that we spoke about today and whatever new program might come from that. Also fleet electrification, as we spoke about a few minutes ago. Potentially looking at new transit options for commercial areas like Solano. That's come up a few times in the past. We also mentioned the possibility of developing an EV charging brochure for businesses, for commercial properties. That was a while ago, we talked about it last, but if the committee's interested, we could get into that more. So those are sort of the things that I'm expecting might come up in this bucket. And then there's also building electrification. We have the heat pump rebate program and sort of periodic analysis and potentially refunding it or ending the program, and that will come up throughout the year, I'm sure, as well as the gas line decommissioning pilot program. We're expecting some conversations about that coming up. There's also a possibility of analyzing potential new incentive programs, such as a multifamily structured program, theoretically, and also discussion of outreach and education strategies. And then there's also a possibility for policy development. There's been some discussion in the past, for instance, of a point of sale mandate for electrification. So things of that nature are also on the table. And then finally, there's SB 1383 and waste. So the biggest thing we're planning here is the development of the foodware ordinance that we've already spoken about a few months back. And then we also have a whole variety of SB 1383 related work that we're doing, and projects that we expect might arise. I don't necessarily know exactly what these might look like, but we're always ready for those things to come up and potentially come to the committee. So that's a summary of the things that we expect to be working on, and hopefully it's helpful if there's things you have questions about, or you really want to prioritize, or you think are missing here. This would be a great time to kind of discuss that as a committee. And then finally, I also want to just touch on subcommittees. So we currently have 5 subcommittees that are active. We have environmental justice, student outreach and engagement, zero emission transportation, home electrification mandate, and climate emergency declaration subcommittees. And I just wanted to kind of note exactly how subcommittees work, because they can be a little tricky. Technically, we have ad hoc committees. They have to be less than a quorum, so a maximum of 3 members. And they're also supposed to have a limited purpose and limited timeline. So these subcommittees are really meant to be focusing on a specific project that can be accomplished within, you know, a specific period of time. And that is what allows us under the Brown Act to have subcommittee meetings that are informal and not public, which is really helpful for kind of getting work done and brainstorming, as we know. But it also means that it's important to make sure that subcommittees aren't just kind of existing without a task and kind of going on forever. They're not really supposed to just last into eternity. You're supposed to make sure that they have a clear task that the committee has agreed on, and then when that task is complete, the subcommittee disbands. It's always possible to recreate that subcommittee when there's a new task to work on. And you know, if it's also possible that a subcommittee might finish a task and then immediately have a new one. That's okay too. But it's just important that we make sure that the subcommittee tasks are clear and specific. And if the subcommittee isn't doing work, that we disband it. So I would also recommend, that's our staff recommendation for this item, here is to review each of these subcommittees and clarify that purpose, or to sunset it if it seems necessary. So that's sort of the to-do list for this item, is to look at those subcommittees and then also just to take that moment to review any questions about the committee or the Brown Act, and also the planned committee work for the year. Any questions about that?
I guess I have a question about, you know, so you said the action item is to review the activity of the subcommittees. Will there be a specific Climate Action Committee meeting where we review that at some point in the future here coming up, or how is that going to be sort of resolved?
I think in the discussion period of this item would be a good time to talk about that. Yeah, to do it right now. Yes. I will say, you know, obviously we're pretty short on committee members tonight, so it might be that it makes sense to put this on the agenda again for discussion. You know, you could have a short discussion now or postpone it. You know, if there are committee members present that you want to make sure have input on a specific subcommittee they're on, that's fine. But this is the agenda item to do that work. Yeah.
Any other questions? If not, we can go on to public comment.
Thank you, Chair Mohammed. We have one person who would like to address the committee. Nick Peterson, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. I know when I was on the committee, the 3 main priorities were zero emission transportation, building electrification, and then promoting the planting of trees. And I'm kind of sorry to see that the accelerating tree plantings and increasing the ability of the urban forest in Albany to provide shading and carbon sequestration is not really there anymore, and we've got this third waste management related thing, which is important, but doesn't really affect the emissions. So anyway, I would suggest that we at least bring back in promoting, and working on policy, which brings me to sort of transition to policy approaches. I think policy approaches are real key, but they're political hot potatoes. And I'm afraid a lot of them that we've brought forward get kind of resisted a lot and then die on the vine and don't come to fruition at all. And one of these is the point of sale mandate, which when I was proposing it, when I was on the committee, was the idea was we would start with something that was very palatable to people. It could even be as simple as a disclosure initially, and then as you went along, you would start upping the requirements on it, because at some point we have great regulations for new construction in Albany. They're fantastic. And so we know every new building in Albany, which isn't going to be that many because there's not that many places to put new buildings. But there will be some, but those buildings will be great and we don't need to worry about them. So we're done with that. But we have zero, nothing policies for what you're allowed to emit from an existing building. And you need to start establishing that. So the committee needs to come up with a policy initiation, of which the point of sale mandate initiated at least for houses that were being sold, a certain level or a certain declaration of what that performance of that home was and requirement at some point that it be improved. You have to start somewhere with that, and you can't just sweep it under the rug or forget about it or sunset it. So I'm pleading with you to please continue to work on that and come up with a workable policy that you can present to the city council. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Lucinda, please go ahead.
Yes,
I'm sorry, Lucinda, I clicked the wrong button. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there we go. My fault.
Okay, great. I also feel that the tree planting program is very important and would like to see that prioritized again. However, I think that SB 1383 is also extremely important, and it is absolutely related to emissions. The composting or green waste in our landfill is a major source of methane emissions, which is 80 times or something more dangerous than CO2. So 1383 I do see as important, and I think there is widespread lack of compliance with 1383. I mean, I see, many neighbors that are not composting their food waste. There's widespread misunderstanding about what can be recycled and what can be composted. So I think both the tree planting and SB 1383 are important. I do agree with the previous speaker, Nick Peterson's comments about it is absolutely essential that we find some way to require electrification in the existing inventory of homes, and it's not enough to, as we have now, requiring it in new homes. We have very few new homes or major remodels in Albany. I don't have a solution as to how to reach that inventory, but we have to find some way. I know there had been a proposal for a point of sale, requirements at point of sale, and I agree that needs to be explored further. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands raised.
Thank you. We can move on to discussion of this item.
I mean, if this is where we're sort of reviewing what we're doing and sort of, whether it should be continued or not. I'll just speak for the electric vehicle, electric. What were they? Zero Emission Transportation Committee. We have divided up 3 different areas for that within the subcommittee members. I did the fleet electrification that I just presented. Troy is working on, I think it's sort of pole-mounted charging, and Dan was working on commercial charging. So I think the Zero Emission Transportation Subcommittee is still working on things that are relevant to the work plan and active at this point. So I would suggest that we continue with that subcommittee.
Do you want to talk about the home electrification mandate subcommittee?
I've talked plenty tonight. Why don't you?
We do have projects that we want to do concerning outreach. And so I think we want to keep it open.
That said, it may have a different name, just Home Electrification Subcommittee. I guess just to note, I've forgotten the dates, but the Bay Area Air District, Michelle, you're up to speed on this, so please clarify what I say. But they have, in the 7-county district, banned the sale of space heaters that would emit more than a negligible amount of NOx. So it's, in effect, it's a ban on natural gas-fired space heaters. And for residences, it's effective maybe 2030? I don't remember. Michelle, could you fill in on that?
Yeah, there's a ban on gas water heaters and gas HVAC systems. I believe the water heater starts in 2027 and HVAC 29, although I might have those flipped.
Okay. And by HVAC, that means like a conventional forced air furnace is banned?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the installation of a new one.
All right.
So I'll also note, you know, however you want to go about it, but it'd be good, I think, for the subcommittees, you know, as you're kind of talking about what you're doing, to also get feedback from other committee members on, yeah, how they feel about the work you're doing, and making sure you're all clear on what exactly that specific project is, and that everybody kind of agrees to that. Carry on.
Well, I agree that home electrification is a really important area, and if you've got activities that you're working on, then I would support keeping that subcommittee going.
For the student outreach and engagement subcommittee, we have been working on the plan, the resolution we've been doing, and we've been doing like outreach to teachers in Albany, especially in like elementary schools. So we're still doing that project, right?
I think my one comment would be that we should probably think of a new project, just because we did decide to transition it away a little bit from this group. Especially like, we had that like whole meeting and that whole thing about how like the committee isn't directly working on it, but rather supporting the overall initiative. And that's like kind of the language we came to. So this is not actual subcommittee updates, because I see that's another agenda item. So I won't share like what that is right now, but I guess like for both environmental justice and student outreach, like we need to think of a new project that directly relates to the committee, rather than like the project that we kind of agreed on would be more of our own initiative supported by the committee, rather than a committee initiative. So I think that needs to be discussed, and I don't know like if we'll have that answer by the end of the meeting, and I think that's a conversation that we could have after, that's a little like longer and more in depth. But basically coming to the consensus that we want to keep them, but think of new projects, and like if we could talk with like you, or if you guys have like, ideas of stuff or like, things that relate to these topics that you would recommend us to work on, definitely open to any feedback, ideas, suggestions, whatnot.
I guess my only comment would be, I'm not sure if that's, based on what Michelle was saying, if that's the, the approach that our structure is supposed to be. I think it's very worthy work. If you've sort of accomplished what you set out to do in those subcommittees, then maybe it's time to sunset those committees. And then when you have a new proposal, or the committee has a new proposal that you want to investigate, then you create a new subcommittee. Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah, I'd say that, if there is something that, you have a project in mind you want to pursue, you want to keep the subcommittee running to do that, that's fine. But generally, it's best if it arises organically from a project you have and you create the subcommittee for that, rather than saying, oh, we have this subcommittee, let's come up with a project. Obviously there's some middle ground there, because you'd say, oh, this is a topic we know we're interested in, but usually it's best to focus on the project first and then create a subcommittee for that. And it's really flexible, because you can sunset the subcommittee tonight, and then you can come up next month and say, oh, we have this project we want to do, we want to create this subcommittee, and you can create a new subcommittee, right? So it's not like there's, it's not like you're bound to anything. So that flexibility makes it really easy to sunset and start a new project whenever or sunset and start a new subcommittee whenever a project arises that you feel like you need to work on. So that's how I'd recommend doing it, unless, it might be that you two feel like, oh, you have a few ideas and you're kind of coming to something to propose to the committee. If that is the case, that's okay. But if you're really just kind of fishing for a project, I would wait till one arises and then create a subcommittee based on that.
Okay, well, that's really loud. In that instance, then I'll say, we should probably put the student outreach and engagement subcommittee on, hold, temporary, because our big goal was we wanted to educate AUSD. Our goal, when we started to work on it, was how can we educate AUSD students who aren't getting environmental education, and how can we make, climate literacy following other cities and neighboring cities, how can we bring that to our cities? And we accomplish that / are actively accomplishing that. And I can share more about that in item 6-4, a little bit about where that's at, but it's in a positive direction. We got everything that we needed from the committee, which ended up being that declaration of support. And in terms of the environmental justice, we were thinking of doing some kind of, we have 2 or 3 concrete ideas, so we'll keep that one open. But we can put the student outreach and engagement subcommittee on hold. I won't say we'll trash it completely, because we know that we're really, especially as students, we're really, inspired by that topic, and it's really important to, bring especially, advisory body of the city to, local students. But when something transpises or comes up, then we'll just revamp that committee and bring it back, because it is so flexible. So.
Did you want to talk more about the environmental justice subcommittee and the ideas? You mentioned having ideas for a project on that.
Yeah, one would be kind of, obviously we don't know how feasible it is, and we haven't talked about logistics, but an overarching idea would be holding some kind of, I wouldn't say webinar, but maybe student teach-in, engaging students in the topic of environmental justice, because I know a lot of students, I realize more and more that the environmental justice subcommittee and student outreach and engagement subcommittee are very intertwined. And I'm also open to maybe making that one committee and changing the name a little bit, environmental, I don't know how that would sound right now, but maybe because a lot of the work that we were doing or wanted to do with environmental justice involves student engagement. So now that I realize that, then maybe we can just make that one committee, but like maybe holding some kind of teach-in at the high school or holding some kind of event. But again, like the hard part about that is how can, like, is that something that we can do with the CAC? And like, how does that work? Like if we were at a table, for example, and do like an environmental justice, like informative tabling or interactive tabling about like what is environmental justice, like at the high school, like I don't know if that's plausible, or if it's gonna be another one of those things like the CAC can say, we support this, but we're not directly gonna work on it. So that's like the questions we kind of had, and I guess that is like turning it around to more of a question. Like if we were to hold like a teach-in or like some kind of event, how would that look in terms of?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think, yeah, my thought on that maybe is that, you know, you might frame it as we're gonna kind of combine these subcommittees into one thing, and the task is going to be to determine if there's a good way for the committee to be involved in environmental justice outreach. And then, you know, maybe the committee members and staff can kind of have some conversations about what that could look like and what would make sense for the committee to be involved in versus like students on their own doing. So like maybe that's the task for right now, does that? So yeah, maybe that's how we kind of frame the work of that committee. And yeah, maybe it's combined with a new name, or maybe we just call it the Environmental Justice Subcommittee and make that it. Yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Or like maybe like environmental justice and education subcommittee. Yeah, and kind of bring that into one, and then have like a later conversation about how, like, that where that kind of line between, you know, committee work and student work, and like where that boundary lies between being able to like host events or host, you know, whatever, or do whatever. So yeah, because it's not more like the other subcommittees where it's more like presentation based and we vote on something and we discuss something, but it's more like we do stuff at local areas. So yeah, I think strongly of just combining them into like an environmental education with a focus on environmental justice, kind of one subcommittee, and it will highlight working with students in AUSD. But yeah.
Okay, so maybe it'll be helpful for me to kind of review our overall picture for everyone. So we've got Student Outreach and Engagement Subcommittee, which is sunsetted and kind of combined into the new Environmental Justice Education Subcommittee. The task for that is to work with staff to determine what routes there might be for the committee to be involved in environmental justice and education outreach in the city. We've got the Home Electrification Subcommittee that is going to change its name to just be Home Electrification Subcommittee or something similar. It's working on electrification outreach. And I don't know if I don't think there was anything else mentioned in that. So it could be just thinking about ways to do electrification outreach only. Or if there's a little bit more to that, let me know. And then finally, there's the Zero Emission Transportation Subcommittee that has 3 different things happening. The fleet electrification, proposal development, public charging, proposal development, and I'm sorry, Eric, what was the last one?
Troy had some idea about pole, you know, like
Oh, yeah,
power
right,
pole
right.
charging, and then Dan was more interested in like commercial charging, I
Okay,
think.
yeah, so we
I
got
think that's-
public and then commercial.
Yeah, I think that's
So
what it
we've
was.
got those 3 areas.
Commercial meaning public charging at commercial spots or something.
Right. So yeah, looking at different proposals for each of those 3 areas of charging. And then we have the Climate Emergency Declaration Subcommittee, which has very specific work of creating the declaration, which is on an item later on this agenda and could be sunsetted after that, assuming that goes smoothly. Does that all sound correct to everybody here? Okay, so I'll leave it open then to make, I think the motion would really just have to be about the sunsetting of the Student Outreach Engagement Subcommittee, and then the changing names of Environmental Justice and Electrification Mandate. The kind of tasks I don't think we need to have in the motion itself. So hopefully that simplifies it. So I'll stop there. If anyone has more things to add or comments or changes, please go ahead. Otherwise, someone could make a motion.
We have like 5 minutes left, so we would make a motion to extend this meeting. Anyone?
I'll make a motion to extend for 5 minutes? 10.
I'll note we do have subcommittee updates, with maybe will be fairly short, and then we also have the climate emergency declaration and future agenda items next, although the committee could choose to postpone any of those items if it wanted to.
I was kind of thinking that the climate emergency declaration, maybe we should postpone, not only for time, but also having more membership on the committee to ratify that. So is that a separate motion? It is, isn't it? Do we have to do that before time runs out? Anyway, I'll second the motion for 10-minute extension.
So 10
First
minutes
off,
from now or until
Can
9?
get that done.
Sorry, just so I'm clear.
10, so 10 after 9, right? Yeah.
Okay, Member Sassoon? Member Larson?
Yes.
Member Melgen?
Yes.
Chair Mohammed?
Yes.
I make a motion about the declaration of emergency now?
Why don't
or
we
wait?
why don't we stick with the subcommittees?
Okay. Regrettably, I'm the only member of the Climate Emergency Declaration Subcommittee here tonight. So I would suggest, first off, that for the next agenda, include this item, but the very last chapter, I sent a suggested rewrite of that, and if you would put that on the agenda and send it out, I'd appreciate that. And then we'll discuss this one at our next meeting. Is that all legal?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, there's, right now, it's Climate Emergency Declaration -1 PDF, and it has in it a last paragraph that's fairly long. So I wrote this in the first place. The committee has not reached a meeting of minds on this, which is why it's this separate paragraph at the end. I propose to shorten and streamline it, so I would like that shorter, streamlined version to appear on a PDF 2, and then that's what we would discuss next month.
Okay, all right, well, okay, that will be a future agenda items thing to
okay.
discuss then. Okay, sorry. So yeah, so right now we're still in 6.3, talking about the subcommittee makeup and how we're going to change the names of those.
Well, no change, but extended for a month until the next meeting?
Okay, so yeah, perfect. Okay, so if anyone has a motion on subcommittees in total, then.
What would the motion be?
So I think we had sunsetting the student subcommittee, changing the name of environmental justice to environmental justice and education, and then the electrification mandate becomes just home electrification, if that all sounds correct.
And the climate emergency is extended for a month? I'll
Yeah, you don't
move
need
to those
you
four.
don't need
Okay.
to move to extend it. It just exists till you get rid of it.
All right, then I will motion for the Environmental Justice Subcommittee be changed to Environmental Justice and Education, sunsetting the Student Outreach and Engagement Subcommittee, and changing the name of Home Electrification Mandate Subcommittee to just Home Electrification Subcommittee.
Second.
Okay, Member Fasoon? Yes. Member Larson?
Yes.
Member Melgen?
Yes.
Chair Mohammed?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. And then, were there any other comments or questions anyone had relating to the committee role, the Brown Act, or any of the planned work items. Okay, great, thank you.
We can move on to the next item, which is subcommittee updates.
For the previous student outreach engagement subcommittee, I made well, I guess it's not really with the committee anymore, but I can kind of just share because the committee supported it. So I made like a spreadsheet with teachers at AWSD and the elementary schools. I want to say there's 3 off the top of my head. And kind of wrote a draft blurb to send out. I refrained from sending it out because it was winter break and teachers deserve winter breaks too, and I know they're really busy working. So I plan to send that back now that students are back in school and teachers are back in normal working hours. So I will send that. And I shared it with you. I don't know if you got it. I also texted you, but I know you were busy probably with like college apps and stuff. So no worries on that, but I did share that with you when you have a chance to look at it. But yeah, so I just wrote a little blurb, plan to send that out. And I'm gonna get some support from a group that I'm in on campus at Berkeley that does experience and has educational materials. And once those teachers respond, then I'll share. The materials are already made and have been approved by a lot of teachers. So they cover like a variety of topics, from like, you know, endangered species to like the importance of recycling and compost. So yeah, I think they're really great presentations, and I look forward to working with the teachers once they respond, and I'll send those out, preferably like this week.
Any other subcommittee updates? You can just do them all in one here.
Okay, zero emission transportation, I presented stuff that I did, and Dan and Troy are working on theirs, or working on their projects.
Do we have an update, or we're just?
Just in emails between the 3 of us, Katie has mentioned some ideas for outreach that sound pretty exciting. So that explains the name change, or the change in focus, put it that way. That's all I have to say.
Are there any questions about the updates? If not, we can move on to public comment.
I'll note if we want to keep on our timeline, it might be wise to reduce the public comment time period, but we don't have to. We only have 1 hand raised at the moment, and we still have future agenda items.
I think it's fine if we have 1 hand raised, yeah.
Okay, Nick Peterson, please go ahead.
Thank you. Question here, and maybe staff can just answer during my time. I have a few comments on this. Can I just email them in?
Yeah, you can always email your comments to the Climate Action Committee email address.
Yeah, I'll do that in the interest of time. Thank you.
No other hands are raised.
Thank you. Then we can, I mean, if there are any comments about the updates. Not, I think we can move on to the next item.
Yeah, so did the committee all agree to skip the climate emergency declaration? We don't need a motion for that. So we can move right ahead to 7, which is future agenda items.
So I'll, for the fleet electrification, I'll bring back a revised proposal for city council, or for Climate Action Committee review for Possible action to city council.
Oh, and of course, the next agenda should include the climate emergency declaration.
Any other requests?
Not, I think, oh, I have one. For the foodware ordinance plan, you guys mentioned you guys are doing it. This is kind of like far future, but if we could get an update on that once it starts, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
If there are no other requests, we can move on to public comment.
Okay, we have one hand raised. Lucinda, please go ahead.
Yes, I'll be very brief. Foodware ordinance, which Michelle presented on a few months ago. And I just wanted to point out that the City of Oakland just passed a foodware ordinance just last month requiring reusables only in all in-dining establishments, for all in-dining, and prohibiting, among other things, the sale of bottled water at any city event. There's some other details, but it's a great ordinance, which is similar to Berkeley's, and I would like to see Albany follow the lead of Oakland and Berkeley. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands raised.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and adjourn. Our next meeting will be February 21st. Thank you.